Hey everybody, Aaron Cowan, Sage Dynamics, and this is the Vortex UH-1 Gen 2 holographic weapon sight. Latest generation of the UH-1, which is one of those optics that people tend to be hot and cold on. So the Gen 1, people either loved it or they hated it. A lot of people discounted it immediately because of the appearance. It is slightly boxy in appearance. It may be the last kid you pick for dodgeball because of the way he looks, and realize that he's got a golden arm when you actually get behind one. So the original UH-1, Gen 1, I was a big fan of. Gen 2 came along not long after the Gen 1 was released. When we think about how long it usually takes optic companies to provide updates, if at all, of their optics, I was a little bit surprised that the Gen 2 came along as quickly as it did, but I think that's because Vortex was listening to the customers and trying to produce a better sight. And realistically, they probably didn't have to make a whole lot of engineering changes. Of course, the real question is going to be, are those changes good? Do they make sense? And do we really need them? Getting right into the features of the Gen 2 UH-1, talk about the reticle. If you want to get my attention when you're designing a holographic weapon sight or a red dot sight in general, you make a 1 MOA reticle, and that's exactly what they did. I'm a huge fan of 1 MOA because it gives me the ability to see as much of my target as possible at increasing distances. It also has a 65 MOA ring with a 10-yard CQB delta point of aim. So the reticle is simple, but it gives us a lot of options for various aimings and rough estimations for distance as well as windage. It is kind of touted as a CQB sight. However, using it during the review process, I was able to shoot out to reasonable distances using that 1 MOA dot. I was able to see a lot of my target. So coming over from other dot sizes, even a 2 MOA with a lot of bloom from an RDS versus a holographic, sometimes I can't see what I'm aiming at. If I'm shooting a 200 meter zero, which is the zero I use, the 50/200, which is actually 200, a steel plate at 200 yards can be a little bit difficult to hit with a lot of bloom and excess refraction, if you will, off of a 2 MOA dot that's non-holographic. So just clarity of the reticle was impressive. It is CR123 powered. It does default to their mounting system, which I tend to kind of not care for. I like when the aftermarket is able to make varied mount options for mount heights for an optic, because some rifles prefer a lower optic just based on the nature of the cheek weld. If you take a traditional buffer tube AR compared to like a SCAR or a Bren, where you're able to get your head a little bit lower behind the gun because you don't have to worry about that uninterrupted buffer tube, some sights, if they have proprietary mounting, sit a little bit too high. The converse of that, of course, is when you take the AR and you want something you can passively aim through with night vision, the UH-1 having a night vision setting, which we'll talk about, sometimes they sit too low. So you need a Goldilocks height, which usually the aftermarket provides for, because some manufacturers, if they provide different mounting heights at all, it's usually 2 and they're very close to each other. So going into it, I was a little bit concerned about the optic height, even though it had that night vision setting. A wide degree of brightness settings, including push-button night vision settings, which is very appealing. Passive aiming is something that used to be relatively unknown, but as more and more people get into night vision, and even for some people that they're able to have like night vision and a rifle and an optic, but they don't necessarily haven't been able to save up the money yet for a good high-quality laser, like a Maul or something like that. Passive aiming may be the only way they can shoot under night vision until they're able to get that laser system, and then they're able to use the laser. Passive aiming is also something you see in military and law enforcement. If you're worried about the bad guy having night vision too, you can passively aim to reduce your potential exposure, because lasers work both ways. So it's something that more and more optic companies are pursuing. Night vision in general magnifies available light. So every optic technically has a night vision setting. You just turn it down to its dimmest brightness setting and use that. But that generally, depending on the quality of your night vision, leaves you with a much more exaggerated reticle based on halo and overall brightness. So having dedicated night vision settings that are tuned for night vision acquisition makes a lot more sense. And having it on a push button was kind of brilliant. It's a simple change, but it's really cool that all I gotta do is hit a button, go right into my night vision settings. Another cool feature is the battery cap. And I know you're thinking, what? The battery cap is brilliant. No longer do I have to give myself arthritis messing around with a little knob or a small screw so small to aggravate a Swiss watchmaker, or have to have some kind of special tool that was designed by somebody who pleasures themselves in me losing that part and then having to contact them for a replacement. Or I don't have to use like an armorer's wrench or a quarter or a nickel or a dime or something in order to remove the battery cap to replace a battery. I have a folding twist ledge, if you will. Fold it up, twist it off, change the battery, put the new one in, fold it down when you're done. Cap is retained. Super smart. And I'm wondering why no one has done this sooner. So as you guys know, with my normal review process, the very first thing I'm going to do is that 500 round burn down. I'm going to put 500 rounds through the firearm, in this case in regards to checking out the UH-1 Gen 2, to see if that accelerated rate of fire, that excess buildup of heat or any other thing, is going to cause any issues that you wouldn't notice if you fired the same amount of rounds over a longer, more relaxed period of time. So without any further delay, here's your 500 round burn down. One thing I was definitely looking for during the burn down was flickering or fading of the reticle brightness, which is something I have noticed specifically with holographic weapon sights, but I've seen some LEDs do it as well, when a lot of heat builds up around them and underneath them. And because the body is almost completely aluminum, except for obviously internal parts, it's going to act as a heat collector, and any heat generated from the receiver for that accelerated rate of fire is going to eventually bleed into the optic itself. So after that 500 rounds, the body of the optic was noticeably warmer than when I started. However, during the shooting, 500 different sight pictures for every round fired, I didn't notice the reticle get any dimmer or start to flicker or fade or behave any way other than it had before the very first round was fired. So very first round to last round, reticle continued to behave as I wanted it to, which is exactly what I was looking for. So as far as burn down goes, big pass. After the burn down, I started using the UH-1 just in my normal practice for anything rifle related to get those 2,000 rounds done for the purpose of the video. The large view window is something that is an acquired taste. Some people like a little more of a tubular design. It kind of helps them focus in on what they're trying to do and they don't get a lot of extraneous data downrange. I can go either way with it. For night vision, the larger the window, the better. For general daytime shooting, I don't necessarily need a ginormous big screen TV size viewing window, but I do appreciate it because it gives me a lot more visual information than I might otherwise get when I'm on the gun and I'm shooting at whatever distance or whatever I happen to be doing. One thing I do appreciate just from the window size in general, and this is getting into the nuance of it, is when transitioning, working multiple targets, I can get the bleeding edge of next target a lot quicker as I make that transition if I'm staying in the optic while I make that transition. And that gets into, you know, purpose of training technique. Do I turn the eyes and then move the gun, or do I stay in the optic when I transition? I think you should be able to do both based on the distance and the situation in which you're shooting or what you're trying to replicate in your practice. But being able to get that data a little bit sooner and not have the optic body itself block it because I have a much smaller field of view is something I definitely appreciate. The reticle kind of demands a window that size, and the reticle itself, using it through, you know, the 2,000 rounds plus I put through it by the time I made this video, I really appreciate the 1 MOA dot, obviously, but the ring and the delta, my 10-yard holdover, if you will, I found to be useful at a lot of different distances. Not just 10 yards as intended. It's a really good hold point for me, shooting out to 250, 300 yards unmagnified, being able to hit 8, 10, 15-inch steel. Working small plates up to like B zones and then full-size silhouettes. It provides a really ideal point of hold so I don't have to kind of do the red dot guesstimation that we're sometimes used to when it comes to just shooting with a reticle with no actual segmented circle or additional point of hold. So window size reticle behaved in a way that definitely appeals to me, and it makes me kind of rethink some of the other optics I have. Another cool feature is The windage and the elevation adjustments are both on the same side of the body. I don't have a top and a side or side or any other configuration like that. They're both on the same side. And again, this is one of those simple changes. We add that to the battery cap and the night vision mode button, and we've got three very simple, at least apparently simple to the layman, changes in kind of the fundamental design of optics that give us some cool features that we don't necessarily know we needed, or maybe we'd always kind of in the back of our mind subconsciously wanted them. When we see them, we're like, why has it taken so long for someone to do this? Big elephant in the room, at least for people who are watching these videos, is it going to break? Am I going to be able to break it? For the purpose of the review, I mounted on a PWS Mark II, 11.5 inch barrel, the Mark 111 Mark II, if you will. And I zeroed it for 50/200. After the zero, I began the review process, of course. Every 500 rounds, I did a shoulder height drop test on it. What I'm looking for isn't because I believe people are going to drop their rifles from shoulder height, but I'm delivering a consistent shock to the rifle in a somewhat quasi-scientific way in order to see if that sudden impact is going to cause loss of zero, breakage, or damage in any other way. So before I began the drop process, a 5-round group that I fired at the 50-meter zero distance right after this is the group I fired right after the zeroing. For record, here's where our zero is prior to the first drop test. And then I dropped it. And here's a 5-round group fired after the final drop. I'd call that zero maintained, which is kind of what I expected. This thing feels overbuilt. It feels like they designed it thinking someone like me might do things like I've done. Or maybe they designed it to be as durable as possible. The size and the shape lends itself very well to the durability, I think. I could tell that someone either inadvertently or directly intended this optic to be used in a way, maybe a manner, much harder than what I'm putting it through. Like, I could see this thing very easily being able to handle much harsher environments for much longer periods of time than my 7 or 8 trips to the range that it took me to do that 2,000 rounds for the review process, the 4 drop tests, and all the other nonsense I put it through. So this is a small footprint of the overall life expectancy of the optic, and you can definitely expect me to do an update on this optic in the future. Once I get a higher round count on it, I'm going to continue to evaluate it, leave it on that gun, and see where it takes us from there. But my initial impressions after the 2,000 rounds are very positive. One of the questions that comes up that I've already had people ask me about it is, how is the night vision setting? The night vision setting does exactly what the night vision setting is supposed to do. Some people have alluded to the fact that you get better clarity of vision through different optics that have night vision settings, and that may be true. But looking at it singularly, and this is why I don't really do comparisons, if the goal is to be able to acquire passively a reticle under night vision and be able to PID and hit a target, then it checks all of those boxes. Yeah, maybe you could PID theoretically a little bit better through some other optic. I don't know. I shoot all of my red dots on rifles have at one time been fired passively through night vision. I have a set of thin film L3 PVS 15s in white phos. I also have a no filmed L3 green phos PVS 14. Actually, it's a Viper body. And I can PID at distances I would expect to PID with a non-magnified optic through night vision. Sometimes I got to push a little IR range down, or IR light down range to polarize and be able to see the target better, because the reticle, even with a night vision setting, is going to bloom a little bit halo, and that's because of the night vision tube. It works, so that's exactly what I would want it to do. So the night vision setting for me is huge. Kind of alluded to it earlier in the video, height. So this thing defaults to a lower 1/3 co-witness. It does sit a little bit too low for a very comfortable cheek weld when passively aiming. It's not as bad as some of the other smaller optics that are out there. The window size kind of compensates for the height of the optic. So because I have a larger view window, I'm not as put out, if you will, because of the height. So even though I would like it to sit a little bit taller, or a little bit higher, I should say, the window size does help compensate that for very well, and some of the optics do the same thing. Generally, the larger the view window, the lower the height you can get away with. But all things being equal, I'm going to put a riser underneath it at some point, just because I want the optic to naturally sit more in line with my eyes versus having to scrunch down on it, especially when I'm wearing night vision. The final verdict, of course, is it's a great optic. It really is, and it's something I am generally going to continue to use, and I'm probably going to purchase another one. If I get another rifle and it needs a red dot, and I'm not worried about magnification or anything like that, and I want something that's going to be night vision capable, this is the optic I'm going to get. The price is very reasonable. Some people have complained that Vortex optics are getting more expensive. Yeah, maybe, but the something to consider, I guess, with that is maybe that's because they're getting higher in quality. And you do have to pay for engineering and quality whether you like it or not. And these days, in this particular market right now, finding things at MSRP is a wonderful thing to experience versus what you're seeing with some of the other things that are going on right now in 2020 with the, we're getting ready to get into our third ammo and gun scare, I think. So definitely something to consider when your purchase is an optic is, did the price go up because the price went up, or did the price go up because you're getting more for your money? And in this case, I think in the Gen 2 of the UH-1, you're getting more for your money definitely over the Gen 1. Nothing wrong with the Gen 1. I like the Gen 2 better, which means the changes they made were purposeful and they actually provided more value versus just making some cosmetic changes to make it more appealing, maybe a small feature here and there. So the Gen 2 is definitely what the Gen 1 should have been, which is how every new variation of an optic should be. It should have been what you had all along. Lessons learned, engineers listen to feedback from the customers, and they give us the improvements that we want, and that's definitely something that we got with the Gen 2 of the UH-1. So if you're already a fan of the Gen 1 and you're in the market for another optic, just buy the Gen 2, sell your Gen 1, and buy the Gen 2. If you have to have a UH-1, you have to have the Gen 2. I'm Aaron Count with Sage Dynamics. Train accordingly.